Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Richardson, and this is In Retrospect. So this is the fourth episode I will be posting to YouTube. It debuted 3 weeks ago. I've been posting every Tuesday. It is nothing sophisticated at this point. It is just an audio clip that's uploaded with a photograph, and I hope to go from there. But I appreciate you guys sticking around, listening to it, the number of you that have. Stay faithful to it. I promise it will get better, but for now we're just in the baby phase, in the new project phase of this undertaking. And so thanks for that and for sticking around so far. The order of events for today's show: sports betting, game of the week, challenge of the week, song of the week, Ohio State versus Nebraska review, and Ohio State versus Penn State preview, college football, of course. So hopping into sports betting, just a disclaimer: this is not an endorsement or an encouragement or incentive to influence anyone to try sports betting, but I make this just to talk about my experience with it. And if you're interested yourself, these are some things you might want to know before you hop into it, or these might be reasons for you not to want to do it. But this is just a discussion about sports betting in my experience. So I bet typically at least $20 to really play around with it. So there are different kinds of things you can bet on. You can bet on the over-under, on the total points scored. So typically Las Vegas books or predictions or odds makers, they create different parameters and stats and predictions that they will set bets at, that you as a participant or a gambler really can place money on based off of the odds that they create. And somehow Vegas just knows. That's the saying all my friends say. We just joke around, even if you win bets, somehow Vegas just knows how to set it, what to set it at. Their predictions are excellent. Sometimes it makes you think they have things rigged, but as far as my knowledge goes, it's not rigged. It just feels that way because of how many times I've lost. But anyway, the over-under, let's say, for instance, this coming game or a basketball game. Let's think of a basketball game actually in the past. So based off of, these predictions are made based off of stats that are accumulated throughout the season, depending on the team that's playing, depending on who their players are, depending on their matchups. Just all kinds of things go into these predictions. But typically an over-under is on Las Vegas setting a score that either, as the gambler, you believe that the total points scored between the two teams added together is either above or below this number. So let's say, for instance, it's two really good basketball teams that are just great scoring teams. Las Vegas would put them probably at 220 or something like that for an over-under. So that means they would expect the total scores. So if the Rockets were playing the Warriors or something, they would expect that the Rockets would score 112 points and then the Warriors would score 108 to make that 220. And so you would either predict, based off of how you feel the teams have been playing or how you think they might play that night, you will predict that the score will be either over or under. And with that, in my experience, I've taken the under a few times, and it hits. All these kinds of things hit plenty of times. That's why the odds makers keep doing it. It is a huge money-making business. You win a lot, you lose even more, and you just have a fun time with it. It makes you care about games that you don't really think of. But you can do the over-under for each half or each quarter or full-length games. Typically, rooting for the over has been more fun in my experience, although you do have to hope that defense is terrible and everyone's just clicking and scoring. And for the NBA, the overs were hitting a lot. And for college football so far this season, the overs were hitting quite a bit as well. For the NFL, yes, the overs are hitting, but not as often as college football has and the NBA was, just because all the time off from coronavirus, the defenses aren't really up to par with what they're going to become. And so that's just been exciting to root for. Also, there is what's called the money line. That is just based off of who you as the bettor predict who is going to win the game, and you put money on it. Now, depending on how much of a favorite the other team is over another, some bets are a longer shot than others. So this past weekend, Ohio State played Nebraska, and Ohio State was a significant favorite. We'll get to a point spread here in a second. And so if you were a bettor and you really, really had faith that Nebraska was going to pull off a miracle win, instead of covering what's called the point spread, which we'll get to, but just outright winning, that was a very low odds, high risk bet. And so let's say with the high risk, low odds bet, the number would be plus. If it's plus, that's where it's higher risk, lower odds. So let's say it was plus 200 something. I didn't look it up specifically because I didn't bet on that, but this is just an example. So let's say it's a long shot for Nebraska to win, like it was. The odds of them winning outright, if you bet $20 on that, if somehow Nebraska pulled off the outright win, you would make a significant amount of money from just that one bet. And then you can turn that into a parlay. You could turn that into multiple pieces of a contingent bet, but we'll get to that. And so essentially that's just called the money line, who you think is going to win outright. That's the most simple bet I've done, and it is not as risky in some instances. And you typically, if you're more into the betting and you're more into stats and odds making, you would be into the point spread. But sometimes I just do money line if I do bet to keep things simple. Another thing you can do is the point spread. So Las Vegas favored Ohio State to beat Nebraska by 27 points at least. And so let's say, for instance, you want to say that Ohio State is going to cover that. That means they have to win by more than 27 points. And based off of the predictions, based off of how the teams have been performing, just the experts somehow figured this out. Their odds makers do. They decided that point spread. And Ohio State covered, so if you put money just exclusively on Ohio State covering, they won by more than 27, so that was good. If you bet on that, you would win. But it was fairly, it wasn't the best odds because it was predicted that Ohio State could cover that spread fairly easily, and so they won't give you as much of a payout if you risk, say, $20. Or if you wanted to put money on Nebraska covering the spread, that means Nebraska has to lose by less than the spread. So that means they could have lost by 24 points and you would still win. And Nebraska would be okay as far as betting. Now, if you're a Nebraska fan, you're still sad that you lost, but if you bet on them covering the spread, and they did, that's like a 1-for-1. You win one, you lose one. There's also live betting, where depending on if it's at halftime, if it's at the end of a quarter, even if it's on a commercial break, because there's plenty of commercial breaks, you can place live bets. Typically, it's the most exciting way to do things, but it's very risky. I have watched instances of my friends placing a live bet on a basketball game in the early fourth quarter or the late third quarter where the team they wanted to win was down 10 or 15. They placed $20 on that for them to come back and win outright. And they ended up doing that. And when those kinds of things happen, you have good payouts. But statistically speaking, most of the time, there's not really a science to it. You could say that there is, and you could argue that there is. But there is somewhat of a science to it. But really, it's just a toss-up. And the live betting is fun. It's exciting, but I've lost a few live bets in my day. And then there's parlays. So parlays are contingent multiple part bets. So an example of this would be, let's say as an Ohio State fan this weekend, which this is what I did, I put $20 down. And so the more contingent bets you place that are dependent on each other, the lower the chances are of you getting that. Therefore, the higher the risk, therefore a higher payout. So what I did was I predicted that Ohio State was going to hit the over-under against Nebraska. So the two teams would score enough points to go over the over-under that was predicted. And then as a second piece of that, I predicted that Michigan State would cover the spread against Rutgers. And Michigan State ended up losing. I ended up losing that bet. And so, but before the games took place, I risked $20. And if I win, I was going to win $60 to $80, I believe. And so you technically don't pay to play, you only pay when you lose. So I risked $20 to potentially get the payout of between $60 and $80. I can't remember the exact number just because I didn't win. But that's just an example of it. You could do many multiple part parlays. You could do just 2-part parlays, 3-part parlays. It's exciting to do. You get higher payouts, but like I said, it is lower odds, higher risk. And I've had a few parlays hit, or I've watched others have a few parlays hit. That's the figure of speech, really, if your bet goes through. And that's fun and exciting. But like I said, it doesn't happen that often. And a lot of times we use the saying, I want to cover my losses. And so you drop another bet, and then you just lose another bet. And so that's where it becomes dangerous, and that's where you really have to watch yourself. If you are going to get into sports betting, you definitely should do some homework first. Don't bet alone. Bet with someone. Talk to someone about it. And just, I would say that you should be on the same page about your betting with someone else. Just because there are people that get really into it. They turn it into more than just a game. They turn it into a lifestyle, and that's not always healthy. Then they turn it into going to the casino every day, or they're just constantly risking money to hope to get a payout as a form of income. That's never a good thing to do. But if you do decide to spend a little like a little money that you have just saved up and you want to try to make some money, but at the same time you're just playing with it, really, sports betting is a fun way to enjoy games that you might not have enjoyed otherwise or cared about otherwise. But it's definitely a fun way, an interesting way to get into sports a little bit more, and stats, and why betting on those stats would be smart and why betting on these stats might not be, or things like that. So that is Sports Betting 101 as best as I know. If you have a sports betting experience, just comment below what it was, or at least just a tidbit of it, and I would be interested to read that. So moving to the game of the week is Texas Hold'em. Seems like I'm talking about gambling and betting a lot today. That just seems to be the theme of today. I haven't really been betting that much, but I'm going to play Texas Hold'em this week. It's going to be a fun time with my friends. Shout out to those guys. It's going to be excellent. We're just going to do a simple buy-in where you either pay $10 up front or $20 up front or something, and everyone gets the same number of chips, and you just play Texas Hold'em based from there. And then you have rounds of betting and all those kinds of details, but I won't get into that. Essentially, it's a poker card game. They play it in movies, casinos. It's not 21. It's not blackjack. It is completely different. It is called Texas Hold'em. It is not 5-card stud. You are given 2 cards from the dealer, and each person is given 2 cards that play, and eventually the quote-unquote dealer or the house flips over enough cards, depending on what style of Texas Hold'em that you're playing. But if you're playing in a casino, there's going to be a house versus other players. And so there's 5 cards that get revealed in a certain order, and you place bets on how you think your cards in your hand that you hide from everyone else and that you keep the poker face, quote-unquote, how your cards you're trying to predict and risk money or risk chips that you bought with money on what you think the cards are going to be turned up as, how you think you're going to do when cards are turned over. It's definitely a lot of fun. You could play this game for free. It's not as quote-unquote exciting per se because you're not playing with anything risky, but at the same time, it is just a game. There's no reason to put money into a game if you don't want to, but I would recommend, especially if you've never played it before, learning how to play. For one, it's an excellent game to play. I played it as a little kid on Super Mario Brothers DS download play, and we had a fun time, the new Super Mario Brothers with the mini games, and we didn't play with real money. We just played with in-game chips, and eventually you have a winner, first place, second place, third place, fourth place, and so on. It's fun to play even just without money, but if you do decide to do gambling, there's a lot more intricate rules that go with it and different ways you can do that. But it is definitely comparable to something that you could do like a day at the arcade, a dinner and a movie, or something, but it can be done at home with friends in the comfort of a garage, of someone's living room, a card table. You can really do a lot with it, and it would, like I said, it would be cheaper than dinner and a movie, but you get twice the excitement and it lasts longer. So you do what you want, but if you definitely consider having a card game night with your friends, or just a board game night like what me and my friends have done, I would recommend Texas Hold'em as a game to check it out, and it is definitely worth your time. The challenge of the week. So last week's was go out and do an exercise at least once. I actually did that, and I'm very thankful for that. These challenges of the week have been really good for me. I hope they've been equally as helpful, if not more helpful for you. But I did go out and take a walk when I was working yesterday, and it was just really nice to be out, and it was only a 10-15 minute walk. It was nothing super impressive, but it was something to pass the time, release a little stress, release a little anxiety. Not that I have all these things built up, but sometimes they do build up, and you would be surprised how much runs through your head, but you're walking and you're just focused on that next step. At least that's how it goes for me. I have a mind that races all the time. I'm constantly thinking about things that I can and cannot control, or just things in general, and random thoughts pop into my head. There's so much randomness, but when you go out on a walk, especially if you're not in shape, if you're really trying to focus, or if you're walking quickly and you're trying to focus on getting your heart rate up, you're really just concentrated on each step. You're concentrated on where you could be going. You're concentrated on how much time you're spending outside, like what I was doing. I was walking in a location where I was just walking around a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood over and over and over and over and over again. So I was just working through a lot of thoughts in my head, and I was just enjoying the outdoors when the sun was up. I even took a few laps of walking, just slow-paced walking, just relaxed walking. It helps with mobility. It helps with your heart rate. It helps with your joints. It was really nice. I was out in the daytime, out in the nighttime. It was really just clearing my mind, and it was excellent. And so I would definitely recommend for you guys, if you're listening to this and you didn't go out and exercise, just go out and take a walk, maybe for 5 minutes. It could change your life. I need to keep doing it. That doesn't mean I should stop. That doesn't mean I should do it one time just because it's a challenge of the week. That doesn't mean you should either. Maybe we could all keep doing a walk, and maybe leave a comment below if you did do the challenge of the week, if you did take a walk, or if you plan to. So that's exciting stuff. But the challenge for this week is I would challenge all of us to drink at least one hot cup of tea. And I talk about this, and it's funny because I've been drinking a lot of tea today, and it's been really nice. It's been relaxing. I'm not working today. I just had some stuff to do with school as I'm a college student, and I've just been drinking tea. It has a little bit of caffeine in it. Been flavoring it with lemon and ginger specifically, and my girlfriend Vanessa has been helping with that. Shout out to her. And it was just really relaxing, really nice, tasty, but also if you have a scratchy throat like I do, or like if you have some sinuses, a nice hot cup of tea can be really refreshing, and it doesn't weigh heavily on your stomach. Sometimes when I get stuffed up or if I feel cold, I want to have a bowl of soup, and that's really nice as well, especially now that the winter is starting to set in. The fall weather is getting into the late cold fall weather. It's almost like we haven't had much of a fall. It's almost like we went from summer straight to winter. Sometimes that happens, but this year the temperatures are starting to drop and we're getting closer to freezing, and you just want to come in and have a bowl of soup, but you don't want to eat. A cup of tea, a hot tea, is perfect for that. And it gives you a nice little jolt of energy, but also depending on the type of tea you're drinking, sometimes it can be relaxing. There's different kinds of teas for different things. You could just have a tea time. It's a sober alternative to having a beer with one of your friends, or I sit down and have a cup of tea with my mom, and she doesn't drink, and shout out to mom, but we would sit, and we have sat and had a cup of tea, and we've just had discussions, or we've just really enjoyed the tea, and it's just been a nice little 20-minute thing that I sit out and do. So I challenge all of you guys to try that at least once, or even go to a restaurant and get a tea. It could be cold tea too. I'd recommend hot tea, because cold tea is typically just the sweet tea, or it's very strong fruit flavored tea. It's all about the sugar, emphasis on the sugar. But I feel like in my experience, my very small, not super knowledgeable tea experience with hot tea, you can focus on more exotic flavors and different feelings you want to maybe experience, or different effects of different kinds of tea you want to experience. You can really experiment more with hot tea. So definitely try that this week. The song of the week is Watermelon Sugar by Harry Styles. This is one of his first singles from his late 2019 album Fine Line. It is a radio bop. It has been playing all year on the radios, the pop radios, the mainstream radio, and it is a great song. It is one of the best songs from the album. A lot of people would say it's the best, but really they couldn't tell you more than 4 songs from the album. I myself personally am a Harry Styles fan. Shout out to him. His first album, one of the best albums I've ever heard. It holds a very special place in my life, and I always have to shout out his first album if I'm ever talking about him, just because the impact it's had on me. His second album, Fine Line, is also an excellent album. It is a completely different vibe than his first album. It has more of a pop sound to it. It has more of a hit. It's artistic and it's expressing certain things, but the focus seems to be in a pop type of genre with the lyrics, instead of more of a, not really alternative, but just a low key. His first album is more like of a low key pop acoustic, whereas this is more of the radio type sound, and it's not as quote unquote unique as his first album, but at the same time there is a lot of art to it, and there are unique qualities about the songs and the unique about the structure. It's just, for me, the first album resonated more than the second album, but that's another topic for itself. But I definitely wanted to shout out to that song this week. I've just been saying, whether you're listening to the song, I haven't really been listening to this song as much. It's just the phrase watermelon sugar comes on my head all the time, because that's from the chorus. And He sings it, and you just hear the phrase watermelon sugar all the time. And then he says hi, like right after that. And it's a lot of fun. It's an exciting and it's a festive song. And it definitely lifts you up, especially in this gloomy weather. And it makes you feel bright, even though it might be a little dull outside. But comment below your favorite song from 2019, if you can think of one, or even something from 2020, really. That is the song of the week. And so the Ohio State versus Nebraska review. So I went 2 for 5 on my predictions. I predicted that OSU was going to win big, 49-21. The score ended up being 52-17, so they won by even bigger than what I predicted. I was correct in that Ohio State will turn the ball over at least once, and it'll be a fumble. That did happen. I also predicted that Nebraska would have at least two turnovers. That happened. I predicted that each team would have at least 6 penalties. So this happened for Nebraska, but not for Ohio State, which is a good thing if you're an Ohio State fan. But the reason why I predicted that was because everyone would be coming off of the coronavirus break in the Big Ten Conference, and you would expect that they wouldn't be in a rhythm as much as they will be later in the season. You just thought they would make some early season mistakes, early game mistakes. But really, Nebraska made a lot of penalties, and it killed their momentum, and I'll get to that. But really, it didn't feel like there was a lot of penalties going on. I felt like the game had a decent flow to it, and it did not feel like the first game of the season. It definitely felt like an October game, even though, I know it is October, but typically the early games in late summer, early fall have a different vibe to them, and they have a different atmosphere to them, and the teams execute in a different way. But this definitely looked like a middle of the season grinded out game. And it was a big blowout, but at the same time, there were aspects of it where both teams could do better or even worse, and there was a lot to take away from it. Another prediction that I had was there would be a big special teams return of over 40 yards with no touchdown. There was not a lot of special teams returns in this game. The kicks were great. The punting was good. The yards were very high on the amount of yards gained from those punts. There weren't really that many returns because of positioning. It's not really that great of a strategy to return kickoffs anymore in college football. It's unfortunate if you like watching that, which I believe it's unfortunate, but ultimately it's for the safety of the players. I do remember over the years before they changed the kickoff rules and the positioning, the field position rules, how many injuries would take place on kickoff and how many injuries still take place. And so it's not really much of a strategy to return kickoffs anymore because kickoff coverages have been so-so. Kickoff blocking, has been so-so, and kickoff coverage has just been excellent. So if you're going to fair catch the ball from the 20-yard line and back, and you can get the ball automatically on the 25-yard line, you're going to do that just about every time, unless there's a wide open hole in the field or a lane to run through. And so I was 2 for 5 on those predictions. I'll have some predictions later. That was exciting. I hope that was fun to talk about for you guys. So review of this game, Ohio State rushed for 222 yards with many carries and yards spread all around. They had 4 touchdowns on the ground. We definitely need more yards out of Trey Sermon and Master Teague. They did get touches. Master Teague had 2 rushing touchdowns. We were good in the red zone. We were efficient, but it felt like we couldn't quite get the push on the offensive line to break open some big lanes for our running backs. Fields ran the ball well. Our quarterback, Justin Fields, did very well. The running game was good, and we racked up good yards. It just didn't feel exceptional. I've talked to a few people after the game, and we were all collectively feeling that it was a very average day, maybe even below average. But then when you look at the statistics and you look at the efficiency, the yards per carry maybe were not as high as you would want, but the total yards gained and the touchdowns and the number of first downs, you think, okay, this really was an exceptional day for Ohio State. And Ohio State passed for 276 yards and 2 touchdowns. Justin Fields almost went perfect from the field. It was a very balanced attack. Jackson Smith and Jigba, a name that I hadn't heard at all. I didn't pay much attention to the recruiting, to be honest. His catch was insane at the back of the end zone. He definitely was out of bounds in every conceivable way. His momentum was pushing him that way. He was in the air, and yet somehow he dragged his right toe to the ground to be in bounds and make the catch at the same time while fully extending both of his hands and using both hands. It was a very good, very, very good out of bounds sideline catch. Chris Olave, and Garrett Wilson were absolutely insane in this game. They had over 100 yards each on their receiving yards. They were dominating the Nebraska secondary. They weren't really gashing it per se as far as throws over 20 yards again and again and again, but they were making guys miss. They were making tough catches. They were running solid routes. So essentially they were gashing them, but it wasn't necessarily 50-yard bombs, what felt like every other drive. But they were definitely doing the right thing, and you hope to see that maintained, and you're very proud of that as an Ohio State fan. And plus, from a college football perspective, when you sit and you've been watching these NFL games, like I'm predominantly a college football fan, but I've been spending more time watching the NFL this year just because college was starting slower for the Big Ten and the coronavirus and all those things, and teams having players sit out and opt out and have coronavirus and they have to sit out. It was just really nice to see a college game with two young receivers really doing things right and playing the game well. And even if you're not an Ohio State fan, you respect what was done, and this game had the highest ratings out of all the college football games this weekend. It was just the first game, which that just goes to show the dedication of Big Ten fans. Even though we don't win the most championships, we always show up, and we're very faithful to our teams. But anyways, as a football fan, even if you're a Nebraska fan, you have to just respect those routes that were being ran. The coverage was exceptional at times, and the throws were even more exceptional, and the routes being run were equally as good. And so it was just a great combination of efficiency and route running and sticky hands for the Buckeyes on the passing attack this week. For Nebraska, costly turnovers, 90 yards of penalties. Momentum is everything in college football. It's everything in most sports, but in college football it's very obvious with the younger guys playing. They have a lot of pressure riding on them. They're trying to play for their future, but also play for the moment. And it's a lot. And so it's a very emotional game. And Nebraska just could not finish their drives. They looked a bit confused at times. They did really well against runs between the tackles, no really long runs, but their red zone defense was okay. They would hold Ohio State pretty well, first and second down, and then they would just give up costly mistakes or bad reads or bad containment or bad coverages on third downs, and that happened over and over and over again. And so it's really hard, especially with a young team like Nebraska. Ohio State's fairly young as well in a lot of ways, but Nebraska is very young, very inexperienced. They're on the come up. They're trying to rebuild Scott Frost's third season. It's just tough. And when you're playing against a juggernaut like Ohio State and they're favored by 4 touchdowns just about, you really expect it to not be that close. But there were times where it felt close in the first half, and just a young team with all the emotions and all the momentum that you can either take in a moment or you can lose in a moment. It just felt like Nebraska kept losing those chances, those 50-50 moments. If we get it, it'll turn the game around. If we miss it, it's going to blow the game wide open. And it felt like the game just kept blowing more and more open for them, and they could not quite grasp at what they were hoping to accomplish. Both defenses looked suspect for sure. Would you expect that, given the time off? Plus, these two teams aren't really, especially Nebraska, is not really known for stellar defense. Ohio State had an excellent defense last year, and they've been ranked very high. But depending on who they play and what game it is, especially just that's how college football is in general, you could easily have all these records and you could have all these stats and you could have this week-by-week consistency, and then it just disappears one day because one team just executes and the other one doesn't. But these teams definitely looked suspect on defense. Ohio State was giving up a lot of plays to McCaffrey, and Nebraska could not stop Ohio State on fourth down. They could not stop Ohio State on third down. I think Ohio State went for it on fourth down a few times, and they were converting. And me as an Ohio State fan, I was like, why are we doing this? You know, the field position's not great. We're doing just fine. Let's keep the momentum in our favor, And yet we would still convert. And so definitely could use improvement from the defenses. Overall, I would say the Ohio State Buckeyes get an A- in my book. They can improve this running game. They had the yards, they had the carries, but the yards per carry were not quite there, and the big runs were missing, and the O-line was missing a bit of a push. But really, an A- is almost an A. So they did just about as good as you could ask them to do for their first game of the season to get prepared for Penn State next week. They know that they cannot lose a single game this year to have national title hopes, and they showed up and played like it, and so they definitely get at least, worst case scenario, an A-. You could argue they had an A, almost an A+. But for me, just setting high expectations for them, knowing the challenges ahead and knowing the challenges across the nation, that they could have against a Clemson or an Alabama. They have a lot to work on, just like everyone else does. And I would give an overall grade for Nebraska to be a C+. I think they need to work with McCaffrey. He looks good. He's a redshirt freshman. I believe that their current quarterback, Adrian Martinez, is not that much better than McCaffrey. They might consider using a 2-quarterback system, and that could work, but I don't believe that would be wise for them long term as far as getting the confidence and the development from each guy that they want. Perhaps it could work. It's worked in the past for some other teams. I remember it worked at Florida when Tim Tebow was a freshman and they had Chris Leak, I believe that was his name, at starting quarterback, and Tim was just a young guy, and he learned a lot, and he would get some running plays, but it was fairly predictable, but at the same time, predictable that you knew that Florida would run the ball when Tim came in, but they would still throw some wrinkles in there, and so you can do those kinds of things. Ohio State expected McCaffrey to run the ball when he came in, and he would do that, and he would do that very well, and if I was coach, it's not up to me. I'm not an expert. They see these guys every day. They see how they practice. They know the likeliness of injury, the big picture they want to go towards. But if I were them, I would give more snaps to McCaffrey. I think he was the X factor for Nebraska, and he made a gigantic difference. And he's what made me feel nervous in the first half because he was just ripping off big runs. And I thought, oh, man, we have another McCaffrey, because his brother Dylan, that was backup quarterback for Michigan for a little while, really didn't come into his own. He still might, but odds are he won't, and he has not yet. But this McCaffrey definitely looks insane. He's very good. So I would recommend that they go towards him. Get the young guys experience. You're building a program, you're developing. Try some different lineups, try different rotations, try new guys in positions. Make sure you play your redshirt freshmen. The guys you want them to only play 4 games, make sure you divvy that out in a smart way. Keep running the ball. The run game for you guys as Nebraska was excellent. I thought you did great. It's about as much as you could ask against Ohio State, but there are a lot of things missing, a lot of things lacking. There was efficiency in the pass game, but it felt like there wasn't that enough throwing. I would say Nebraska should throw the ball more, take some shots downfield. They seemed to play within themselves. They didn't go above and beyond. They didn't take risks. And when you're the underdog, especially a heavy underdog in this game, you've got to take those risks. And that's going to play into the next segment, which is the Ohio State versus Penn State preview for this coming Saturday. It is number 3 Ohio State at number 18 Penn State, 7:30 p.m., the night game, Halloween night on ABC. It's going to be an excellent game. And as an Ohio State fan, you're thinking, well, we should just breeze right past these guys. Do not think that way. Do not feel that way. Penn State had a tough break against Indiana. They had some mistakes that just cost them the game. And they had a tough call at the end, but you expect them to bounce back from that and play as hard as they possibly can. They always play Ohio State with one of their best games of the season, and when it's not one of their best games of the season, they still are chippy, and they are still going to be physical. So Ohio State has to be on alert for that. The Buckeyes open as a 10-point favorite. This has been one of the best college football games over the last few years. This matchup happens every year. They're in the same division, the Big Ten East. It's been one of the top college football games to watch over the past few years. It's been close, but recently Penn State's starting to slip a little bit. I have a buddy that is a huge Penn State fan. He graduated from there, and he is starting to lose. Well, he has lost interest for quite some time in Penn State's Penn State's coach, James Franklin. And so James Franklin seems to be losing his edge a little bit that he was coming up with, that he brought with him from Vanderbilt. He's starting to go down just a little bit. He's starting to decline, and that does not look good for a preeminent college football program like Penn State, especially in games against Ohio State when Ohio State's at the peak of their power in their program history as far as wins and how they win. So Ohio State wins if Justin Fields maintains his efficiency, if Ryan Day does not let off the gas, so to say, and if Ohio State scores more than 31. I think that's all it takes. There's not too much really to it. It's not complicated. Ohio State only beats themselves, like they did last year against Clemson. Really, they are one of the best teams in the nation. If they were really clicking, it could be a toss-up between them and Clemson. I would say just off of one game, though, you don't want to get ahead of yourself, but it definitely looks like right now the competitors for the national championship, it goes Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State. They're all three really in a group together, but Clemson's definitely the favorite right now. And so there's a lot that needs to happen in my mind for Penn State to win, but here's what I would say. Penn State wins if they take risks. You got to take risks. You got to win the 50-50 deep balls. You got to throw it downfield. You or draw pass interference calls. You got to test this secondary for Ohio State. Ohio State could lose if they have a player ejected for targeting. This seems to be a theme in big games lately. There's been a very important player, maybe it's not just Ohio State, but other players get ejected for a BS targeting call, and you just don't understand. But at the same time, it is for player safety, and that's another discussion for another podcast. But if someone very good gets ejected for targeting or even gets hurt, that could be huge for Penn State. I think Penn State wins if they force 2 turnovers or get 2 stops on 4th down, then score touchdowns immediately after on those drives. If Penn State stays disciplined, doesn't get heavily penalized, and they make smarter decisions in the red zone than they did last week. And I think they win if they can call trick plays. If they can mix up the playbook, they can pull out all the stops. This is the game of the year for them. This has been the game of the year for them. It's especially the game of the year for them now. They are in a position where their backs are pushed against the wall, and if they do not win out, they will not have a good year. Some people would argue that no matter what happens this year for Penn State, it might be a down year anyway just because they lost to Indiana. I would disagree. I think you can still make an excellent season out of the circumstances and the games that you have coming. And it all starts this week with Ohio State. And so Ohio State should be alert and aware and on edge and come with a chip on their shoulder because you know Penn State will. And so my predictions for this week, I'm only going to have 4 predictions, 2 for Ohio State, 2 for Penn State. So Ohio State, I predict they're going to win 42-21. I think the Buckeyes are just too much, and they have too many weapons and the efficiency. The only way it goes any other way than a 3-touchdown blowout to me is just if someone gets injured like a Justin Fields, or if Ohio State keeps getting holding calls, or if they get pass interference calls, or if they just give up big plays, or if they turn the ball over. Otherwise, I really don't see that happening. This Ohio State team is looking sharp. They're locked in on a mission. Penn State is locked in as well, but unfortunately they had last week's setback, and they don't have the same talent level that Ohio State does, but they're not far off, and you never know what could happen. But I will say that Ohio State is going to win 42-21. I predict that Penn State's going to throw a costly interception. I predict every interception is costly, but not all interceptions are equal. And so I think they could throw a red zone interception. I'm going to predict that they will throw a costly interception. That's kind of a broad term, but I would say that's either on a 3rd down conversion or a 4th down attempt or in the red zone. That's up for interpretation. I also predict that Ohio State's going to go for it twice on 4th down and miss one of those conversions. Seems like Ryan Day has faith in our kicker, but at the same time, he also wants to put his foot on the gas and play hard, except against Clemson. But that's another discussion for another day. But I do predict that Ohio State's going to go for it on 4th down 2 times and convert once. And I also predict that Penn State is going to hit a 45-yard or longer field goal. I think in order for Penn State to really have a chance, they're just going to have to play above themselves to pull this thing off. And one ingredient to that could possibly be a really long field goal to get the momentum going after a turnover or something, or just an early long field goal. We'll have to see. All right, so that is the show. I appreciate you guys sticking around and listening. It's about 38 minutes this time, just like last week. We'll see what's going to go on from here, and we'll see the format that we're wanting, but I do appreciate you guys sticking around. Today is Tuesday, and I will try to have another episode on YouTube next Tuesday. This is Z, signing off.